If your spiritual life feels like you are just, desperately treading water in this violently rushing river, uh, a 14th century mystic might actually hold the exact blueprint for your rescue.
Yeah, which is definitely a wild thing to consider.
Right, because we usually think of like a medical diagnosis as something clean. You break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, and the doctor just points to it. It's binary, it's broken, or it's not broken.
Completely straightforward.
Exactly. But then you step
Yeah.
into the world of your own internal life, right? Your past trauma, your daily anxieties, your spiritual dryness, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just totally useless. You're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't just isolate one variable when you're dealing with the human soul.
Yeah. And that feeling of standing on the edge of something deep and complex and honestly sometimes super overwhelming is the exact spiritual landscape we are walking into today. We are taking a deep dive into a text that at first glance seems like it should have zero relevance to a modern believer.
Zero.
We are exploring excerpts from the Dialogue of Divine Providence by Catherine of Siena. It's this classic of 14th century Christian mysticism.
It is, it's a remarkable, heavy document, and we need to set our coordinates very clearly from the outset here.
Definitely.
We aren't looking at this from some abstract, purely academic perspective. We are examining this profound, centuries-old text from a layman's, specifically conservative evangelical perspective.
All right, because the goal is to see how this incredibly intimate conversation between a devoted believer and God can actually, diagnose your modern spiritual burnout. We wanted to challenge you to live more fully in the trenches of the 21st century.
Absolutely.
But let's just address the elephant in the room for our evangelical listeners right now.
Yeah, we probably should.
The moment we say Catherine of Siena dictated this work in a state of deep prayer, a state the historical sources often call an ecstasy, and that the book is literally structured as a back-and-forth dialogue between her soul and God the Father, well, red flags are going to go up.
Oh, for sure.
The word mysticism in modern evangelical circles usually sounds really spooky. It sounds anti-doctrinal or like we're, drifting into some new age, highly subjective emotionalism that completely detaches from Scripture.
And honestly, that hesitation makes perfect sense. I mean, the modern vernacular has completely ruined the word mysticism.
It really has.
But medieval Christian mysticism, and particularly Catherine's theology, is fundamentally different from what you'd find in the self-help aisle today. I really want to reassure you, as we pull these sources apart, that this text is fiercely orthodox.
Yeah, it's incredibly grounded.
It is an extended, rigorous meditation on grace, on the cross, and on daily sanctification. What Catherine experienced wasn't some mystical departure from the gospel truth. It was a hyper-focus on it.
Yeah, reading through these excerpts, I was genuinely shocked by how saturated it is with Scripture. I went in expecting this dense, esoteric philosophy.
Right, like floating in the clouds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead, I found a roadmap that sounds like it was written literally yesterday for a Christian who is just exhausted from treating church like a performance metric, or, someone trying to figure out how to love a neighbor who actively drives them crazy.
Because she is taking the absolute bedrock doctrines of the Christian faith, the incarnation, the atonement, the Trinity, and she's dragging them out of the realm of abstract academic theology directly into lived relational experience.
Which is so needed.
And to understand the weight of that, you have to understand her historical environment. I mean, Catherine lived during an era of unimaginable upheaval. She survived the aftermath of the Black Death, which just decimated Europe.
It just wiped it out.
Yeah. Italy was fractured by warring city-states, and the church itself was deeply corrupted and divided, specifically during the Avignon papacy.
So she wasn't writing this from some peaceful, stress-free retreat center in the mountains. She was in the middle of societal collapse.
She was in the fire. And despite that, or, perhaps because of it, she became a towering historical force. She was advising popes, brokering peace treaties, demanding church reform.
Which is wild for a woman in the 14th century.
Unprecedented. But while her political and historical resume is staggering, her true legacy really is her relational theology. Page after page, the text insists that God isn't a distant principle or an unfeeling clockmaker. He is a loving father demanding and providing for intimate fellowship with you.
Okay, so let's start at the very foundation of this theology, because Catherine visualizes the human condition in a way that just, I mean, it grabs you by the throat. She starts with the desperate condition of humanity and God's dramatic rescue mission, centering it all around this one massive metaphor.
Right. She describes the state of humanity after the fall, after Adam's rebellion, as having literally broken the road to heaven.
So the path isn't just difficult to walk on. It's gone, shattered.
Completely destroyed. And what replaces that road is a river. But Catherine doesn't picture, like, a peaceful, babbling stream.
No, not at all.
The text describes a tempestuous, violently rushing, drowning river. This river is her metaphor for worldly sin, vice, and what she continually calls self-love. Humanity is caught in this torrent, drowning, violently thrashing against each other.
When I read that, I couldn't help but think about how perfectly that describes just a bad day in the modern world.
Mhm.
You know, you look at the news cycle or the outrage on social media or even just the anxiety in your own mind when you were consumed with your own desires and fears.
It really does feel like being swept away by a river.
It does. You are just drowning in the noise of your own self-centeredness.
And the ultimate tragedy in Catherine's vision here is that finite human effort is entirely useless. You cannot swim your way out of this river, you can't tread water forever, and you certainly can't build your own little boat out of good intentions.
The road is broken and humanity is drowning. But then the text introduces God's response, motivated entirely by infinite love. And the text implicitly leans on the Greek concept of agape, right? That selfless, sacrificial love God steps in and builds a bridge to span this massive, deadly chasm.
Yes,
And that bridge is the incarnate Christ.
the bridge of the sacred humanity. Because the chasm was created by human sin offending an infinite God, God answers by uniting the infinite height of his divine nature with the extreme lowliness of human nature in the person of Jesus.
I kept visualizing this like a massive structural engineering project. I mean, if you were going to build a suspension bridge over a massive, deadly gorge, you can't just anchor it in the dirt on one side.
No, it would fall apart.
Right. The foundations had to be drilled deep into the solid bedrock on both sides of the chasm.
Ugh.
If it's only anchored on the earth side, the whole thing collapses into the river. Christ, being fully God and fully man, is literally the only entity in the universe who can anchor into the bedrock of heaven and the bedrock of earth simultaneously.
That structural analogy holds up perfectly with the text's architecture. The bridge must be secure on both ends to bear the massive weight of human salvation. But the text goes even deeper into the actual construction materials of this bridge.
This part is fascinating.
It says the bridge is built of virtues, but it is cemented with the blood of Christ.
Okay, I want to pause and push on this specific point because this is where the evangelical lens really comes into play. The text says Christ's blood is the cement. Now, in our churches, we sing about the blood constantly, right? We preach about it.
Every Sunday.
But if we are honest, it can sometimes turn into a bit of a theological cliche. We say we are covered in the blood without actually thinking about the mechanics of it. Why is Catherine so focused on the blood as the mortar or the cement of this bridge? Like, why is that crucial for a believer's daily faith?
Well, it's the difference between a loose pile of rocks and a functional bridge. In Catherine's theology, the blood represents the extreme, incalculable cost of redemption.
It's the price tag.
Exactly. It isn't just a symbol of God feeling sorry for us. It is the actual binding agent that holds the pathway to God together. The text is incredibly clear here. We are not self-made spiritual projects. We are new creations bought by blood.
So if I try to build my own bridge out of my virtues, my patience, my charitable giving, my church attendance, those are just loose stones. Without the cement of the blood, they just fall into the river.
They crumble instantly. Finite human works, no matter how noble or good they seem, cannot satisfy an offense against an infinite holy God. But when your human contrition and your, feeble virtues are cemented by the infinite love flowing from Christ's sacrifice, they are suddenly imbued with infinite value.
That is so good.
This is profoundly evangelical concept. Your hope of crossing the chasm does not rest in the strength of your own climbing ability. It rests entirely in the structural sufficiency of the bridge, held together by the finished work of the cross.
The sources also tie this bridge metaphor directly to the Gospel of John, don't they?
They do. They rely heavily on John chapter 12, verse 32, where Jesus says, "And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." The underlying Greek concept here is super vital. The word used for lifted up is hypsthenai.
Hypsthenai. What is the nuance there? Why that specific word?
So it carries a dual meaning in John's gospel. It points simultaneously to the agonizing physical lifting up of a criminal on a Roman cross and the glorious cosmic exaltation of a conquering king.
Wow.
Yeah, Catherine's bridge is lifted up above the drowning river, yet its feet are still planted firmly on the earth. It unites the ultimate humiliation with the ultimate glorification.
So the cross isn't some unfortunate detour around God's glory. It isn't plan B because things went wrong.
Yeah.
The crucifixion is the ultimate revelation of God's glory.
Christ lifted up on the cross is the ultimate magnet of divine love. It is literally the only thing that draws us out of the water.
Let's bring this down to the ground for someone listening on their commute right now. Maybe you are walking into a job you hate, or you are dealing with a brutal financial crisis, or you just keep falling into the same destructive habit day after day.
And you feel that tempestuous sea rising up.
Up to your neck. The message here is, stop trying to swim the river. Stop trying to pile up enough good deeds to build your own escape route. Your sanity and your salvation rest entirely in the sufficiency of Christ's cross. The bridge is already built. The concrete is dry.
Acknowledging the bridge is the essential first step. But as the text bluntly warns, it is not enough to simply sit on the riverbank and admire the engineering.
Right, you can't just look at it.
You have to actually walk on it.
You have to step onto the structure. And this moves us from justification, being saved from the river, into sanctification, which is the actual daily journey of walking with Jesus. How does Catherine map out this progression?
She provides a very detailed, visceral map. She says the bridge has 3 distinct steps, and she maps these steps directly to Christ's physical body on the cross. The feet, the side or the heart, and the mouth.
It's intense imagery, really, climbing up the crucified body.
It forces you to realize that your spiritual journey is inextricably linked to his suffering. Furthermore, she maps these 3 physical steps to the 3 powers of the human soul: memory, intellect, and will. And most practically for us, they map to 3 sequential stages of spiritual growth.
Let's break these stages down because reading this part of the source felt like a deeply uncomfortable psychological evaluation.
Oh, it really does. The first stage, corresponding to the fit of Christ, is the movement from what she calls servile fear. This is essentially the fear of punishment.
Okay, so you step onto the bridge, you obey God, and you avoid sin primarily because you are terrified of hell, or you are terrified of the earthly consequences of your actions.
Yes, it's the classic fire and brimstone motivation. I better act right, or God is going to strike me with lightning, or I'll lose my job, or my spouse will leave me.
It is entirely based on self-preservation.
That completely, but she doesn't condemn it entirely because, hey, it gets you out of the river.
It's a start.
Right. However, you cannot stay there. You must move to the second stage, corresponding to the side or the heart of Christ. Catherine calls this stage mercenary love.
Mercenary love.
This is the stage where you love God for the rewards, the blessings, and the consolations he gives you. You love the peace he brings to your mind. You love it when he answers your prayers for healing or financial provision. You love the emotional high of a really good worship service.
Okay, I have to throw a flag here because the term mercenary feels incredibly judgmental to a modern ear. I mean, if I am praying for my mother to be healed of cancer and God heals her, my natural reaction is massive gratitude and love for God.
Of course it is.
So am I wrong for that? Is it a flaw to want God's consolations? Are we supposed to be emotionless stoics who don't care about blessings at all?
That pushback is entirely valid, and honestly, the text actually leaves room for that initial human reaction. God is a good father. He frequently uses these consolations, answered prayers, sweet spiritual feelings, circumstantial blessings to draw us in.
He meets us where we are.
He meets us in our immaturity, exactly. The severe warning in the dialogue is not about experiencing these things, but about remaining in a state where your love for God is contingent on them.
Because if it's contingent on the blessing, then
your faith is incredibly fragile. Think about the psychology of a mercenary. They fight for whoever pays the most, and they quit when the money stops.
oh wow.
If you only love God for what he gives you, what happens when the money stops? What happens when he permits a season of profound spiritual dryness where you feel absolutely nothing during prayer? What happens when the cancer isn't healed?
If your faith is transactional, you just abandon the bridge. You stop praying because in your mind, the transaction failed. You think, well, I put in my quiet time, I gave my 10%, and my life still fell apart. The vending machine is broken.
That is the exact spiritual trap of mercenary love. You are still, at your core, loving yourself. You are just using God as the instrument to serve your self-love.
Man, that hits incredibly hard. I think a massive portion of modern evangelicalism is stuck in mercenary love. We package it nicely as believing for a breakthrough or claiming victory, but fundamentally, we are treating God like an Amazon delivery service.
Which is exactly why Catherine insists we must progress to the third step, corresponding to the mouth of Christ. This is filial love, the love of a mature son or daughter.
How does that look different?
In this stage, you love God purely for who he is. You aren't avoiding punishment and you aren't trying to extract a reward. You love him because he's the supreme good, regardless of your earthly circumstances.
But practically, how do you make that jump?
Yeah.
You can't just flip a switch in your brain and say, okay, I no longer care about my circumstances.
Mm.
How do we move from the vending machine phase to the mature phase?
Catherine argues that the transition happens specifically at that second step, the side or the heart. She says the believer must look deeply into the open, pierced side of Christ to see the secret of his heart.
To see his agape.
Yes. When you gaze intently at the cross, your intellect finally grasps the unmerited, infinite nature of his sacrifice. He loved you when you were his enemy. He loved you while you were still thrashing around in the river.
When your mind truly comprehends the sheer scale of that grace, it rewires you.
It transforms you entirely. This is the exact dynamic Paul talks about in Romans 12, being transformed by the renewing of your mind. You transition from transactional religion to transformational intimacy.
Which ties back to those three powers of the soul.
Exactly. Your memory recalls his grace, your intellect understands his unfathomable love, and finally, your will aligns with his will.
So your soul is finally unified.
Yes. True peace, unshakable peace, only arrives when those three powers, memory, intellect, and will, are fully unified in loving God for who he is in his essence, not just what he dispenses from his hands.
I really want the listener to sit with this for a second. If you are driving right now or folding laundry, just do a quick audit of your prayer life. When was the last time you prayed without asking for something?
That's a convicting question.
It is. If your faith is currently hanging by a thread because life is incredibly hard and you don't feel God's presence, there is a very good chance you are stuck on that mercenary step. The pain you are feeling might actually be God's invitation to climb higher, to stop seeking his hands and start seeking his face.
But ascending to that level of pure filial love requires fuel. You cannot muscle your way into it. And Catherine introduces a very specific, almost paradoxical fuel for this climb, which is a profound self-knowledge.
This leads us into one of the most conceptually dense but practically liberating parts of the text, the idea of the tree in the circle and redefining what true humility actually is.
Right. In a deeply profound metaphysical exchange, God tells Catherine a fundamental truth about the human creature. He says that the creature is not.
Wait, not as in we don't exist.
Yeah.
Are we talking about some kind of illusion like we're living in the Matrix?
No, not that we are an illusion, but that we possess no self-originating, independent existence. We are entirely contingent beings. We do not have the power of being within ourselves.
Okay, I follow you.
God, in classic theological terms, is ipsum esse. He is being itself. He simply is. Everything else, including us, only exists because he actively sustains it second by second.
It's kind of like the difference between the sun and a mirror. The sun generates light, the mirror just reflects it. Or thinking about it like a massive power grid. God is the central generator. We are just the lamps plugged into the wall. We might shine brightly, but the second he pulls the plug, we don't just flinker. We cease to exist.
Yeah, it is a perfect analogy. Recognizing this absolute moment-by-moment dependence is what Catherine defines as true humility. Modern culture often misinterprets humility as self-deprecation or self-hatred.
Right, it's walking around staring at your shoes saying, I'm garbage, I'm worthless.
Which is false humility. True humility, according to this text, is simply truthful participation in reality. It is looking at the power grid and admitting, I am not the generator. It is the profound realization of Jesus' words in John 15, verse 5. Apart from me, you can do nothing.
Not, you can do some things poorly, you can do nothing. You are not.
Catherine visualizes this with the parable of the tree. She says the human soul is a tree that lives by love. But a tree cannot grow in midair. It requires soil.
Right.
The soul must be planted deeply in the soil of true self-knowledge, the knowledge of our own nothingness. But that soil is contained within the infinite circle of God's eternal existence.
There's another analogy in the text that makes this concept so tangible. It's the analogy of the empty vessel. Catherine notes that if you take an empty vessel like an empty clay pot and you strike it, it makes a loud, hollow, booming noise.
It echoes with a chaotic resonance.
Exactly. And isn't that a flawless description of human anxiety? When we are empty, when we are trying to rely on our own non-existent power, and life strikes us, we lose a client, our kid gets in trouble, the car breaks down, we just resound with this hollow, panic-stricken noise.
We freak out.
We complain, we lash out.
Yeah.
But if you take that exact same vessel and fill it to the brim with water and then strike it, it doesn't make that anxious noise. It's solid. It absorbs the blow.
And how does the vessel stay full?
The text says you have to hold the vessel continuously under the fountain. If you pull it away, it empties and becomes hollow again. Holding the vessel at the fountain of living water is the practical application of staying planted in the circle of God's presence.
What is so masterful about Catherine's theology here is how she balances the tension between our indignity and our dignity.
Walk us through that tension, because I think we struggle with that.
Our indignity is our fallen nature, our sin, and our absolute ontological bankruptcy apart from grace. We are the empty, hollow vessel. But our dignity is that we are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and we are bought at the infinite price of the blood of Christ. We are vessels meant to hold the divine life.
You have to hold both of those truths simultaneously.
You must. If you only focus on your dignity like saying, I am made in God's image, I am highly favored, you inevitably fall into spiritual pride. You start believing you are the generator, not the lamp. You become self-made and arrogant.
Right.
But if you only focus on your indignity, I am a wretched sinner, I am nothing, you fall into crushing despair.
Which is a trap a lot of evangelicals fall into when dealing with doctrines like total depravity.
Yes. But when you realize you're absolutely nothing without him, yet infinitely, recklessly loved by him, it destroys both pride and despair. The staggering beauty of his mercy only becomes fully clear against the dark velvet backdrop of your own fragility. It frees you from the exhaustion of trying to sustain your own spiritual existence.
Think about the low-grade anxiety that just hums in the background of your life. That deep ache that no promotion, no relationship, and no amount of money ever seems to fix. We treat that ache like a disease we need to cure.
We medicate it constantly.
Yeah, but the text is saying that God-shaped void is a feature, not a bug. That holy discontent is meant to drive you back to the fountain. When you feel hollow and resonant with anxiety, don't try to fill yourself with worldly distractions.
Yeah.
Plunge the vessel back into the center of the circle. Let your nothingness be filled with his everything.
And this profound internal realization of God's love and our own dependence cannot remain trapped in your own mind. It is a dynamic force. It must inevitably flow outward.
It has to go somewhere.
Exactly. You cannot separate deep internal contemplation of God from active, gritty charity toward others.
This moves us from the internal landscape to the external reality, the crucible of neighbor love. And Catherine drops a theological bomb here. She makes a claim about our neighbors that genuinely stopped me in my tracks.
God explicitly tells Catherine that every single virtue is obtained by means of your neighbor. And conversely, every single defect or sin is committed by means of your neighbor.
Every virtue? Andy? Every sin. That seems like an overstatement. What if I'm just sitting alone in my house dealing with my own private pride or lust?
Well, Catherine argues that because self-love is the root of all sin, it ultimately manifests as some form of harm, neglect, or deprivation to the neighbor. Even private sins warp your soul in a way that makes you less capable of loving others.
Oh, I see.
And on the flip side, because true love for God must manifest externally, it always shows up as virtue directed toward a neighbor.
I feel like a lot of modern believers, myself included, secretly wish we could bypass this. I want my spiritual growth to be a totally private transaction. I want to lock myself in a room with a cup of coffee, my Bible, and a worship playlist, and just achieve perfect holiness in isolation.
Sure.
Because people are messy.
Yeah.
People are annoying. It would be so much easier to love God if I didn't have to deal with his children.
It would be easier, but it wouldn't be Christianity. The text points out a structural, unchangeable reality of human existence. God says, you cannot pay me back directly for my pure love, because I loved you before you even existed. I need nothing from you.
Right. God is completely self-sufficient.
So, to give us a venue to express our love, he has placed us among neighbors. You prove your love for the invisible God by pouring out selfless love on the visible neighbor, especially when they cannot or will not pay you back.
So God intentionally engineered the system this way.
He engineered it down to the smallest detail. The text even says that God intentionally distributes gifts, resources, talents, and even virtues unequally among humanity.
Wait, God intentionally makes us unequal. We are constantly trying to level the playing field, but Catherine says the inequality is divine design.
Yes, but not for the sake of oppression. The inequality exists so that we are structurally forced to practice charity. We are forced to rely on one another.
Oh, that makes sense.
If every single person possessed every spiritual gift, infinite wealth, and perfect health independently, we would be completely isolated. There would be no opportunity for sacrificial love, no opportunity to give, and no necessity to receive. The gaps in your neighbor's life are the exact spaces where your virtue is supposed to be deployed.
That completely reframes everything about community. But we have to admit, people aren't just lacking things. Sometimes they are actively difficult. They are hostile.
Which brings us to one of the most practical, piercing insights in the entire book. Catherine asserts that virtue is proven by its contrary.
Proven by its contrary. Break that down for us.
You cannot prove you possess patience when you are sitting alone in a perfectly quiet, air-conditioned room. Patience, as a virtue, literally does not exist in a vacuum. You only prove your patience when you are confronted by an angry, irrational, or irritating person.
That is so true.
You prove your humility when someone else is acting arrogantly toward you. You prove your deep faith when you are surrounded by unbelief or despair. The contrary force, the difficult neighbor, is what actually forces the virtue to manifest into reality.
So the annoying neighbor is basically the gym equipment for my soul.
Precisely. If we look at the broader biblical narrative, this echoes the Hebrew concept of hesed, which means steadfast, covenantal, merciful love. God's hesed flows into your empty vessel at the fountain, and the pressure of that water must force it outward toward the neighbor.
So loving your neighbor isn't just about social decency or being a nice person or keeping the peace. It is the literal love of God being poured out through your physical life.
Exactly.
I want you to think about the absolute most difficult person in your life right now. Maybe it's the coworker who constantly takes credit for your work and talks over you in meetings. Maybe it's a family member who knows exactly how to push your deepest buttons at every holiday dinner.
We all have one.
We naturally view those people as obstacles to our spiritual peace. We think, if they would just go away, I could be holy. But Catherine's theology flips the script entirely. That difficult person is not an obstacle. They are the precise environment God has ordained for your faith to become visible. They are the contrary force required to forge your sanctification. You can only prove your patience on their impatience.
It is a radical, almost terrifying way to view conflict, but it immediately raises a massive practical issue.
Burnout.
Yes. If we are supposed to constantly pour ourselves out for difficult people and constantly pursue this rigorous internal holiness, how do we not burn out? How do we avoid falling into a rigid, exhausting, soul-crushing legalism?
The evangelical burnout rate is terrifyingly high right now. People volunteer for everything, say yes to everyone, and eventually just collapse.
Catherine anticipated this completely. She addresses it by introducing a concept she calls holy discretion.
Holy discretion. It sounds like a polite medieval way of saying, be careful.
It is much sharper than that. Discretion, in her vocabulary, is not just practical caution or risk management. It is a spiritually disciplined judgment. It is the ability to render to God, to your neighbor, and to yourself exactly what is due, no more and no less.
And how do we get that?
The text describes discretion as the direct child of self-knowledge.
Oh, I see. Because I know my own limits, my own nothingness, I am able to practice discretion.
Exactly. The text issues a severe warning against relying on extreme external penances, corporal disciplines, or excessive religious performance.
Like what they used to do in the Middle Ages.
Right. In the 14th century, it was common for highly devout people to engage in severe fasting, sleep deprivation, or even physical self-flagellation to prove their devotion to God. Catherine warns that if these practices are detached from internal wisdom and pure agape, they aren't holy at all.
They're just pride.
They become grotesque manifestations of self-will and spiritual pride. You are just trying to prove how tough you are.
Let's translate this to the modern conservative evangelical experience, because we aren't walking around wearing itchy hair shirts or whipping ourselves in the town square.
Thankfully.
But we have absolutely created our own modern versions of physical penance, haven't we?
Without a doubt. The mechanisms changed, but the pride remains identical.
It's the crushing pressure to read the entire Bible in a year and feeling like an utter failure if you miss 3 days in Leviticus. It's the unwritten cultural rule that a good Christian never misses a Sunday service, serves on the worship team, leads a Tuesday night small group, volunteers at the food pantry on Saturday, and of course makes sure to post a photo of their open Bible and coffee cup at 5 a.m. on Instagram to prove they had their quiet time.
That is the modern hair shirt.
If we are doing all these things to earn God's favor, or to manage our own anxiety, or to prove to the church lobby that we are super Christians, we are committing the exact same sin of pride Catherine is warning about.
It is the exact same error. Drawing heavily on Paul's argument in 1 Corinthians 13, if I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. The text argues that finite works without a gate profit absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
You can run yourself into the ground serving the church, but if the engine driving you is pride or anxiety rather than selfless love, the work is spiritually dead.
So how does holy discretion act as the antidote to this burnout and pride?
Holy discretion operates through the Greek concept of diakrisis, which means deep spiritual discernment. Discretion provides a very specific rule. You must love God infinitely, without any measure or limit. But you must love your neighbor with measure.
Hold on. Love my neighbor with measure. That feels entirely contradictory to the gospel. I thought the whole point of taking up my cross was to lay down my life for my neighbor without limits.
You are called to lay down your life, but within the bounds of truth, wisdom, and your own finite nature. Loving your neighbor with measure means two things. First, you never commit a sin against God in order to help or please a neighbor. You don't lie to cover up for them, for example. Second, it means you do not destroy your own soul or your physical health through boundaryless, prideful striving.
You recognize that you are not the Messiah.
Precisely. You are a finite creature. You cannot fix everyone. You cannot say yes to every ministry opportunity. Discretion is the humility to say, I am an empty vessel. I only have so much water to pour out today.
That is unbelievably freeing. I think someone listening today desperately needs permission to hear that.
Catherine clarifies that all spiritual disciplines, fasting, intense Bible reading plans, ministry service, are merely instruments. They are not ends in themselves. The goal of the Christian life is a transformed, loving heart, not a flawless religious resume.
Right.
If a discipline is actively helping you love God and your neighbor more deeply, use the instrument. But if it is just feeding your ego, or if it is destroying your health and your family because you refuse to set boundaries, discretion demands that you put the instrument down.
Check your motives today. Why are you serving in that ministry? Why are you reading that heavy theological book? Are you trying to build a resume to impress God and other people? Or are these genuine instruments drawing you closer to the heart of Christ? The goal is intimacy, not a checklist.
However, we have to be realistic here. When you drop the religious resume, when you stop trying to earn your salvation and start pursuing this radical, internal, grace-driven faith, it is going to cause immense friction.
Friction with the outside world and friction within your own heart.
Yes. And Catherine describes this friction using the image of a refining fire. The text portrays God as a fire ever burning and never consumed.
That's a gorgeous image, but also slightly terrifying. I mean, fire destroys things.
It does. But Catherine makes a vital theological distinction. The divine fire of God's presence does not destroy what is inherently good, unique, or beautiful in the believer. It doesn't obliterate your personality.
So what does it burn?
What it consumes is the dross: sin, spiritual coldness, and self-love.
So the sanctification process isn't meant to turn me into a generic, boring clone. It burns away the false self. So the true version of myself, the one God actually designed, can emerge.
Exactly. But that burning process is painful. It involves suffering. And the text notes that our willingness to endure trials, friction, and misunderstandings for Christ's sake is what ultimately reveals the depth of our union with him.
And as this fire burns, it provokes a very deep, almost visceral emotional response. The sources spend a surprising amount of time talking about tears.
Catherine outlines different stages of weeping that directly mirror the stages of spiritual growth we mapped out earlier. First, there are the tears of servile fear weeping because you are terrified of the judgment of hell.
The tears of self-preservation.
Right. Then there are the tears of self-interest or mercenary tears weeping because you are suffering earthly pain or because God didn't give you the blessing you wanted.
Which we all do.
Of course. But as you climb the bridge and grow closer to the fire of God, you reach what she calls the sweet tears. These are tears of profound weeping over the offenses committed against God and the tragic lostness of the world around you.
I have to admit, when I read that, I really struggled with it. The text says that the more we know God, the more pain and intolerable grief we will feel at the offenses committed against him.
Yeah.
That sounds like a recipe for clinical depression. Why is increased grief and weeping considered a sign of spiritual health? Aren't Christians supposed to be characterized by joy?
We are absolutely commanded to be joyful. But joy and grief are not mutually exclusive in the Christian experience. What Catherine is describing is not a despairing, hopeless sorrow. It is a deeply loving sorrow.
A loving sorrow. How does that work?
Think about the mechanics of intimacy. As you draw closer to God's pure holiness, your sensitivity to sin naturally sharpens. You begin to love what God loves, which means you inevitably begin to grieve over what grieves God. You begin to feel a fraction of what the Creator feels when he looks at a broken, rebellious world destroying itself in the river.
So it's not that I'm just becoming a miserable, cynical person. It's that my heart is breaking for the things that break the heart of God. My emotional register is aligning with his.
And this brings us to one of the most beautiful promises in the text. Catherine writes that those who enter into this loving sorrow taste the earnest of eternal life in this life.
How does feeling grief give you a taste of heaven? That seems totally backward.
Because this holy, loving sorrow never leads to despair. It leads directly to fervent intercessory prayer. When you weep for the lost neighbor, or for the corruption in your city, or for the stubborn sin in your own heart, you are driven to your knees.
You take it to the Father.
Exactly. And when you engage in that deep, agonizing intercessory prayer, you are actively partnering with Christ, who the book of Hebrews says always lives to make intercession for us. That partnership, that shared burden, is the deepest fellowship possible. It is a taste of the intimacy of heaven.
That entirely changes the paradigm of spiritual grief. If you are listening to this and you look at the news, or you look at the dysfunction in your extended family, or you see the moral decay in your culture and you feel this deep, breaking ache in your chest, don't be afraid of that. Don't numb it with mindless entertainment.
Let it drive you to prayer.
Right. Recognize that ache as God actively sharing his own heart with you. Let that holy grief turn into intercessory prayer. It isn't a sign of your despair. It is a sign of your union with Christ.
It is proof that you are walking the bridge. But to continually walk that bridge, to love your irritating neighbor with measure, and to willingly embrace the refining fire, you have to surrender the one thing you most fiercely want to protect.
Our own autonomy.
Yes, the surrender of the will. This leads to Catherine's final, overarching instruction on the golden key of obedience.
The golden key. I love how she uses these tactile images to explain abstract theology.
She sets up a profound contrast here. She states that Adam's disobedience was the mechanism that locked the door to heaven, but Christ's perfect obedience was the key that unlocked it. She leans heavily on Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 2, describing how Christ ran eagerly to the shameful death of the cross, entirely submitted to the Father's will.
Let's look at the Greek word for obedience here, because the English word obey just sounds like following rules. The Greek is hypoko, correct?
Hypoko, it's a beautifully layered word. It literally translates to active, submissive listening. It implies pitching your ear towards someone.
I love that, pitching your ear.
It is not about blindly following a sterile rule book. It is about continuously tuning your ear to the voice of a trusted master and voluntarily aligning your actions with his desires.
Active, submissive listening.
Catherine identifies this kind of obedience as the absolute, definitive cure for the root of all human evil, which we established earlier is self-will and self-love.
You know, I was trying to conceptualize this battle with self-will, and I kept picturing what it's like to drive a car in terrifying conditions. Imagine you were driving on a winding, narrow mountain road. Yeah. It's pitch black. There is a dense, blinding fog. You have no GPS, and there are cliffs on both sides. That scenario is the perfect metaphor for navigating life via self-will. You are gripping the steering wheel so hard your knuckles are white. You are terrified, guessing at every turn, completely consumed with stress. Why? Because you are technically in control, but you have absolutely no idea where you are going or what is ahead of you.
That is the defining anxiety of the modern age right there. We are in control and we are terrified.
Exactly. And biblical obedience, hypoko, is simply making the decision to pull the car over, slide into the passenger seat, and let Christ take the wheel. Christ, who possesses infinite wisdom, who knows every single inch of the road, who controls the weather, and who knows exactly where the destination is.
It takes so much pressure off.
It feels deeply scary at first to let go of the steering wheel. But once you do, it brings immense, sweeping relief. It frees you from the crushing responsibility of having to be the master of your own destiny.
That analogy perfectly captures the spirit of the text. Catherine describes obedience not as a crushing, restrictive burden, but as life-giving rest.
Jesus said that too.
Right. This is a direct echo of Jesus in Matthew 11. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. The yoke of obedience is what unlocks true peace and tranquility of heart.
But our modern culture absolutely violently rejects this. The air we breathe is autonomy. We are constantly bombarded with slogans like, You do you, follow your truth, be the CEO of your own life, never submit to anyone. We view obedience as inherent oppression.
We do, and it is destroying us. Catherine's theology, echoing the deepest truths of Scripture, insists that our cultural definition of freedom is a lie. True freedom is not the absence of boundaries. It is operating within the design of your Creator. True freedom is found only when we stop grasping for control of the steering wheel. When we submit cheerfully and actively to God's will and His Word, we are finally free to be the empty vessels we were created to be. Disobedience and autonomy are actually the heaviest, most exhausting chains you can wear.
I want to ask you a very direct question. Where are you holding on to your self-will today? What specific area of your life are you white-knuckling the steering wheel? Is it your financial security? Is it a relationship you know is toxic but you won't let go of? Is it your career trajectory or a secret habit?
It's hard to let go.
It is, but true rest will never arrive while you are fighting for control. You have to use the key of obedience to lock away your pride and open your heart to His loving commands. Slide over into the passenger seat. Let the Master drive.
It is truly the only way to safely cross the tempestuous river of this life.
Let's pull all these threads together as we wrap up this deep dive. We started with a terrifying but completely accurate diagnosis. Humanity is drowning in a violent river of sin and self-love.
But God, operating out of sheer unmerited agape love, intervened by building a bridge.
The bridge of the incarnate Christ. A bridge anchored securely in both the divine and human natures, held together inextricably by the infinite cement of His precious blood.
We are called to step out of the river and onto that bridge, climbing the steps of the cross. We move upward from the servile fear of punishment. We push past the fragile, transactional, mercenary love of just wanting God's blessings, and we strive for the mature, filial love of seeking His heart above all else.
And we fuel that climb with true self-knowledge, the profound realization of our own absolute contingency, our nothingness apart from grace, resting in the infinite circle of God, who is ipsum esse, being itself.
We take the life-giving water from that fountain and we pour it out onto our neighbors. We radically shift our perspective, realizing that the difficult, frustrating people in our lives are not obstacles, but the very contrary forces God ordains to forge our patience, humility, and love.
We navigate this calling with holy discretion, ensuring that our spiritual disciplines remain instruments of love, not weapons of pride or engines of burnout. We bravely embrace the refining fire that burns away our self-love, and we allow our hearts to break with a loving, intercessory sorrow for the world.
And underlying it all, we surrender our crushing illusion of control, using the golden key of active, submissive obedience to finally find true, lasting rest for our souls.
It is a sweeping, comprehensive, and profoundly biblical map for navigating the Christian life.
It really is.
So here's the call to action for you listening today. Stop wandering aimlessly beside the river. Stop trying to paddle through the anxiety, the noise, and the self-centeredness of this modern age relying on your own strength. Step onto the sure, blood-cemented road of the crucified and risen Lord today. Let your daily life, in all its mundane, frustrating, beautiful details, become a living sacrifice.
And as you commit to that path, you might find that the very shape of your life begins to change in ways you never anticipated.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought to consider. We've spent this entire time talking about how the text reveals Christ as the bridge. But Catherine's writings also tell us that by grace, as we walk this path of sanctification, we actually become another Himself. We are fundamentally transformed into the image of Christ.
We become active participants in the divine nature, reflecting His light to the world.
Think about the implications of that. If that is true, then perhaps in the mundane reality of your daily life, in your office cubicle, at your chaotic kitchen table with your kids, in your neighborhood association meetings, God is calling you to be a bridge.
Oh, wow.
By laying down your own exhausting self-will, by practicing careful, holy discretion, and by living a life of radical, sacrificial, measured neighbor love, your very life might become the structural bridge that someone else crosses to finally escape the river and encounter the infinite mercy of the Father.
That is a staggering, weighty responsibility, but it is also the most beautiful privilege a human being could ever be granted.
It truly is. So the next time you feel like you're staring into the murky, muddy waters of this life, trying to read a broken diagnostic x-ray of your own anxious heart, remember, you don't have to map the bottom of the river. You just have to look up, see the bridge, and take the next step. Something to think about.